So I'm Dominique Hazaël-Massieux. I'm a member of the WCC team, and you might have received in your mailbox a couple of weeks ago a report on the impact of AI on the web, which is going to be the topic of the session today, both to tell you a bit more about the findings of this report and try to gather some input from you all on what WCC should be doing in this space. So why are we talking about AI? Well, we would be the only one not talking about AI if we weren't. Unless you've been living under a rock, AI has been making the news about everywhere. And more specifically, because AI is such a broad naming, I think machine learning models are really being discussed, evaluated a bit everywhere. And the intersections between machine learning models and the web are quite numerous. In particular, for some of the most popular machine learning models you've heard about, they've literally been built from the web, trained from data gathered from the web. More often than not, they are deployed and distributed through the web. You get interfaces that are exposed typically on web site web applications. And the other interesting thing about this AI cycle is that it is bringing capabilities that are on scale that I think are quite comparable to the web. You get the possibility to create and distribute content at a scale that is basically matching what the web enables. And because of this combination of circumstances, it feels to me, and I think having had a number of conversations with you all, not just to me, that there is a potential for a truly systemic impact of artificial intelligence on the web as a system. That is, changes to the web that can transform the nature or the function of the web. And so this was the motivation that led to this report that, again, we shared with the AC a couple of weeks ago. So this is a team report where we try to capture the shared understanding of the team about what the situation is, what are the possible paths that WCC could explore in mitigating some of this impact. And the way we approach this, as Ian described it in the session this morning around WCC workflows, was very much to anchor it into ethical considerations, both the tag ethical principles that Dan alluded to, and some work that the Web Machine Learning Working Group conducted a couple of years around ethical principles for web machine learning. And based on that structure, the report identifies what are the systemic changes that AI is bringing to the ecosystem, what risks these changes create for the web, and a potential, and I will put that word strongly, very much potential mitigations that WCC might consider as being under its scope. So in particular, typical mitigations that either require or would benefit from standardization, or at least from strongly coordinated approach based on a consensus process. So the goal of this session is to try and get a common framing for the discussion that I think the WCC community as a whole needs to have about AI. So first, I'll give an introduction on this document, on these various risks and mitigations that I mentioned, trying to get also a sense of the room on which of these risks, which of this impact feels the most relevant to your organizations. Then we'll hear from three of you, three advisory committee representatives that accepted to prepare a few remarks to illustrate how AI is impacting their use of the web, their use of WCC technologies. And this will seed what I expect to be a rich plenary discussions where basically the floor will be all yours, the conversation will be yours, trying to, again, complete that shared understanding, get new and different perspectives on what impact do you foresee and what role WCC should be playing in that space to help make sure we keep the web as rich and good a platform as we love it. So again, for each topic, what I offer to do is to look at the systemic change that I have identified in the report, what impact, what risk that change may create for the web. And again, I try to focus on what I call systemic risks, that is, things that can transform or have a critical impact on the web, not just things that happen on the web, for instance. And again, identify some of the ideas that have crossed my path, so very much a narrow vision of possibilities of what WCC might need to invest in to manage that impact. And so for each of these topics, I will be asking you to raise your hand if this matches something that is directly relevant to your organization, if this is an intersection that you think your organization see as a critical intersection between web and AI. So the first topic, one that I think has made the news any number of times, is that some of these machine learning models that have been released over the past couple of years have brought the capability of generating credible sounding or credible looking content at a scale that is completely unprecedented, and in a way that could completely drown actual, original, authoritative, created quality content. So if you're no longer able to find what you're searching because there is so much content that is good looking, but perhaps not actually based on anything real, because as you probably have heard, a number of these machine learning models have this structural limitation that they're very good at generating credible content, not necessarily truthful content. If we create this information ecosystem and have it completely drawn by noise, then the web no longer plays its role as an information sharing platform, because it's now just fighting spam and fake content rather than the useful content that most people actually use the web for. So a potential mitigation here would probably to be labeling content that is generated that way. And again, there are already a number of activity happening in that space, for instance, in an organization called C2PA. It only addresses part of the problem because, of course, you're only going to label your content as synthetic if you're trying to do the right thing. If you're trying to create noise, you won't be doing this. But at least it can create an ecosystem where you can and are encouraged to, and maybe in some cases are obliged by regulations to do so. And so you can create a more positive starting point for these conversations. The second topic that I think has also been made visible in this space quite often is the risk that is created by bias. So as you know, machine learning models get trained on data, and the way this data is collected, created, evaluated is bound to have biases because whoever made the selection came with their own bias in doing so. And any process has its bias, but the issue with machine learning models is that they then are able to produce outcomes at such, again, an unprecedented scale. So there are potentially machines at producing bias at scale, at producing potentially life-changing decisions at scale. And so this is something that, as we are looking at how the web is facilitating the deployment and distribution of these models, I think we have to consider the ethical implications of doing so. And ultimately, if we don't, again, we create the risk of transforming the web as this diverse and rich platform, which I think is made stronger the more diverse it gets. We create the risk of making it systematically biased, and so a place that is a lot less welcoming and inclusive It could already be more so, but we definitely don't want to make it less so. One mitigation that the report investigates is using so-called model cards, which are a way of structuring information about how a model was trained, surfacing more data about the training process and the training data set. And right now, this is mostly, I think, an academic paper. There may be something interesting for us to look at in terms of making that kind of data more systematically exposed in a way that is more discoverable than it is today. And a specific starting point for this might be for machine learning models that are used from APIs that are developed in WCC. There are a few of them today that, at least in most implementations, will be machine learning model based, like the speech API is something that is typically handled using machine learning models, and being able to surface that information to developers, to end users, would be a good first step in terms of ensuring we expose that information rather than keeping it buried. Another issue that has emerged around machine learning models, especially the ones that are trained from large-scale web content, is that they can gather, as they get trained, personally identifiable information, which of course creates a lot of privacy risk. Once you start collecting this data, it's also something that today is really hard to protect. Like, there are many efforts in trying to make sure machine learning models only give some sort of outcome, but there are also many techniques to make them take the outcome you want, no matter what the provider is trying to protect. And so if suddenly these machine learning models start to expose a lot of private information that had been protected through some other mechanisms so far, well, again, this creates a systemic risk of making the web no longer trusted by users for sharing their content, sharing their data. And this doesn't necessarily have to be just personal data. You can think of some of the controversies that have emerged about business data being used to train other machine learning models. There are real questions about how do we keep track of who controls the data that gets used in some of these training systems. The only mitigation I have proposed in the document, which there has already been some comment on this, may not be even a completely proper mitigation. But one of the mitigations that is suggested is to strengthen architecturally the web by investing in decentralization. And in particular, some of the recent discussion around so-called personal data stores, which keep the data closer to the user, under a closer control from the user, potentially would have the role of keeping closer track of how this data gets used and reused for training purposes. Security and safety. You've probably heard this story about a trader who got tricked into doing a huge multi-million-dollar transfer because he thought his CFO had told him to, whereas it was a deep-fake impersonation of the CFO that did so. And deepfakes obviously are problematic well outside security. Some of the issues I mentioned around privacy also impact deepfakes. Deepfakes gets used in creating situations that are really problematic for people that are being impersonated. But in terms of security, they create situations where when we actually started using things like WebRTC, Web Real-Time Communications, to confirm the identity of people by having them being in front of the camera, you can no longer rely on this type of analog signal to confirm the identity of someone. And so we probably need some more robust and digital infrastructure to safeguard the platform as a way for transactions and interactions. In this space, I feel we have a lot more timely mitigations that are already under consideration. The recently chartered Federated Identity Working Group typically should help with strengthening some of these identity verifications that can be helped in that space. There is also discussion around verifiable credentials, decentralized identifiers, DIDs, digital credentials. All of these works, I think, are creating a basis on which we can strengthen what is needed to keep the web safe here. Environmental impact, again, probably not something that can have been missed from the news. Training machine learning models, running machine learning models at the scale we are seeing getting done today has a real big environmental impact. In general, digital systems have an increasing environmental impact. And because the work we do in standardization basically brings scale to these digital systems, I feel we have the ethical responsibility of understanding what that impact is and how we can reduce, at least monitor it, and making sure we take the proper mitigations to, over time, reduce our impact there. And of course, the risk for the web could be that, if we are bad citizens, the web will get banned in some countries or something. But the reality is there is only one planet. There is no Earth 2.0. And so it's no longer a risk for the web in itself. It's a risk for us all. So my thinking is that AI here should be maybe the trigger for us to take a more systematic approach in understanding and managing our environmental impact. Today, I don't think the LCC has any framework by which we can review or assess the impact that our standards or the things they enable have on the environment. It's probably long overdue. So my recommendation here would be that not only should we do this for AI, but we should also look at generalizing this sooner rather than later. Something that is probably at the heart of many of your organizations. As I said, a lot of machine learning models have been trained based on content crawled from the web because of the scale of the content the web can provide in doing so. But to say maybe the least, this usage of the content has been done without necessarily clear consent from the content producers. And again, here the systemic risk is that if content producers see that their content gets reused in ways they don't agree with or even explicitly disagree with, then the risk is that they no longer bring the content or they bring it in a way that is less open, less available to use by everyday bodies day-to-day interactions. And that would make, of course, the web a much poorer platform, and in particular risk making it less inclusive, because if the content remains available but behind closed doors, then people that have less wealth will typically be hurt the most. So the mitigation in that space, the most obvious one is probably to look at how to express consent from content producers. Typically, there are already mechanisms that search engines use with robots.txt, but robots.txt typically allow content producers to opt out of being crawled rather than opt in being used, and that probably was fine when robots.txt got created in 1994. 30 years later, whether that's still a reasonable trade-off, I think is probably part of the discussions that need to be had. Finally, something that is maybe a bit more narrow to our scope in the LCC, but at the core of our mission, as the AB Vision document reminds us all, is interoperability. We are here to make things work together by describing the rules under which the system operates. And machine learning models actually create an interesting risk in that space, because some machine models are not deterministic, and so it's hard to really understand what it means to describe interoperability on a non-deterministic system. And even if they are deterministic, two different models probably will have two different outcomes. And so how do you describe interoperability in such an ecosystem? And of course, the web is really built on that notion that interoperability is what enables the universality and openness of the platform that we are seeking. So in terms of mitigation, I haven't identified any silver bullet here. I'm just suggesting we should start looking at this. There are other work in the LCC where we're dealing with non-fully deterministic systems, like typically GPUs have variations across models or across versions. So there may be lessons that we can learn from here. Given that we already have some work that is making use of machine learning models, that's probably also a good way to start such an exploration. So a quick summary of the topics we've discussed. You'll get to see some of this summary back again, but given that I hope we'll have a conversation seeded on top of those, just for a quick reminder, citating content, managing bias, risk in terms of privacy, in terms of security and safety, in terms of sustainability, in terms of consent to training, and in terms of maintaining interoperability for the platform.